Hello everyone and welcome back to Korean History. In today's video of the anatomy of a castle, we are gonna have a look at the towers and in particular the wall towers. There was no universal tower design and the shape and look of the tower depended on the terrain, the designer's vision and the available resources and finances, which gave us a large variety of tower designs in Europe. In the early medieval castles, they were usually wooden towers, and they were attached to the wooden stockades, which would have encircled the main keep or bailey. But sadly, due to the rotting nature of wood, we are unsure how abundant and prevalent these kinds of towers were. Later on in the Middle Ages, more stone was being used inside of the defenses, and this is also when we see stone being used inside of the towers. These could either be fully out of stone, or it could also be a tower with a stone base, but then the top would have been made out of wood or daub and wattle. The towers could be an integral part of the wall, or they could be separate entities attached to the wall but not accessible through the walls. Wall towers usually also had multiple floors, but they weren't always connected internally. For example, you might have to go outside again and there would be an external staircase, or you might have to go to a different part of the wall to access the upper floors of the tower. On the other hand, in some cases the towers were only accessible via the wall walks. And in some castles they even had their own small drawbridges, making that tower a small fortress. Towers were also sometimes left open at the back, and there were multiple reasons why this was done. Not only does it take less materials to construct, making it cheaper and faster to construct, but because of the open back it was also easier to haul up supplies to the different floors of the tower. And this open back also protected the defenders from the enemy. In case the enemy takes that tower, they can't use it against the defenders, which would still be on the inside of the castle. Most of the early castles had square-shaped towers. These were easier to construct but had downsides as well, as they had dead angles and were more vulnerable to undermining. So during the 12th century, most medieval castles started to construct circular or semicircular towers. This was also around the same time when the plinths were being incorporated into the medieval European castles, and I've talked more about that in one of my previous videos. The Europeans had seen these circular designs as well as the plinths during the Crusades in the Near East, and they adopted the superior design when they returned home. It has to be mentioned, however, that this was not a new invention, as the Romans had already known circular towers were more efficient than square ones. For example, the city walls of Carcassonne already included the D-shaped towers of Roman design. This also doesn't mean that rectangular towers were all replaced by round towers, as rectangular towers still had some advantages. They were easier to construct and they also gave a good amount of usable internal space. Rectangular towers continued to be constructed even though they knew the advantages of the round towers as well. The advantages of the round towers were that because of the round shape you didn't have as many dead angles while defending, and the round shape was also more stable, making it more resistant to siege technology. There's also a subdivision of round towers called drum towers. These are usually shorter in height and have a wider diameter, resembling a drum. A good example of this, although it's not a wall tower, is the tower at Windsor Castle. The advantages of rectangular towers and the advantages of round towers could also be incorporated into one tower. Then you'd get a D-shaped tower or a horseshoe-shaped tower. This comprises of a round tower at the front facing the attacker and a square tower at the back facing the inside of the castle. So this way they had the defensive capabilities of a round tower, but they would also get more internal space from the square tower at the back, as well as getting a larger fighting platform at the top of the tower. Polygonal towers were a thing as well. A common form of these was an octagonal tower. Polygonal towers were not as defensive as round towers, but they were more defensive compared to rectangular towers, and still giving a reasonable amount of internal usable space. Towers could also be projected out of the wall to give the defenders a better flanking angle for when the attackers are really close or trying to breach the wall. Towers like these are also commonly known as flanking towers. The spacing of the towers along the wall could vary as well. The most obvious place for a wall tower would of course be at the corners. But with bigger castles, more towers were added along the perimeter of the wall as well, and this could either be done in regular or irregular intervals. In the Crusader states, the Europeans found that placing mural towers in regular intervals gave a bigger defensive advantage, so by the 13th century, many of the newly constructed castles in Europe adopted this design as well. If you'd like to know more about the different parts of castles, you can check out my playlist on screen right now, or if you're interested in history as a whole, you can check out my channel to find a wider variety of historical topics. I'd like to thank my patrons for their support, and especially my $15 patrons, G. David and Parker Dye.